Part 2 of Excerpts from St. Nicholas of Myra, the Unofficial Autobiography by Wally Metts, Jr. This chapter is called Defending the Faith. Yes, it is true. I slapped a heretic. I would do it again, too. But when I first got out of jail, Arius was the least of my troubles. Many of us had been in jail a decade or more, so helping everyone get their properties back was not as easy as just passing a law in Constantinople. Helping everyone get their kids back was even harder, both physically and emotionally. I spent a lot of time arguing with magistrates, and I spent a lot more time comforting parents whose kids did not remember them. And the church was growing rapidly. Because of our persecution, many people were taking us more seriously. Hard times have unintended results, almost always good for the people of God. Constantine's own conversion also made it a fashionable thing to do. Jesus said we would have to sort the wheat from the chaff. He never said it would be easy. This was when I first really noticed the children. They were so fresh and uncomplicated. I'd kick the ball around with them out in the streets, or sit and teach them the old sea shanties or stories from the Bible. I discovered a piece of candy goes a long way toward a smile. But when the famine came, smiles were hard to come by. We saw it coming. The rain stopped. The crops failed. The hunger began. In some ways, it was worse than the plague. Dying is somehow easier than wishing that you would. The worst part is that you feel like you should be able to control it, but you can't. We had money. Money was never the issue. Other churches even sent us money, a common practice since the times of the apostles themselves. But what good is money when there is no bread to buy? That's when the riots started, down at the docks. The workers were hungry and tempers were short. Ships passing through had food enough, but not to spare. The seamen were full. The dockhands were empty. It seemed like every day there was a crisis to diffuse. The troop ships were especially problematic. The soldiers would come ashore and there was nothing to eat or drink. They were often unruly and ungracious. Once, I went to see some imperial officers, insisting that they control their men better. They agreed to set some tighter rules and even pay for some of the damages. But while we were talking, I got word that 3 men were about to be executed. I knew they were innocent. In fact, I knew the magistrate had been bribed. So the officers came with me as I rushed to the square, just in time to stop the execution. Okay, it was a little more dramatic than that. I actually grabbed the sword out of the hand of the executioner, just as it was about to come down on the neck of one of my church members. When the magistrate arrived to protest my interference, he saw the officers and thought he had been found out. He confessed, and the officers arrested him. They took him back to Constantinople. There's no telling what they said. As the famine wore on, I tried harder to buy grain from the ships at port. It was a difficult situation. Cargoes were carefully measured, and the expectations of merchants and investors were very high. I finally convinced 3 captains to sell us grain, 100 barrels of barley from each ship. The grain was not enough, really, but it gave the people hope, and seed, too, at exactly the right time. I helped unload it myself. We paid them. In fact, we paid them well, but it didn't hurt to have a relationship with men who were just seamen when I was a kid. It didn't hurt to have a reputation as a wonder worker either. I hope I can be forgiven for not correcting all their misconceptions. There were stories later that when these 3 ships arrived in Constantinople, their holds were still full. I don't know anything about that. Sailors are imaginative and captains are inventive, especially when it comes to a ledger. But I say compassion accounts for a lot. When I walked around the city with the captains, showing them the empty markets, there were a lot of hungry children on the streets. Do the right thing. That's all I said. Then the rains came. The Lord heard the cries of his people. He always has. There was produce in the market and water in the wells. There was bread and candy and smiles and thanksgiving. There was a lot of that. But as it turns out, the famine was never the greatest danger that we faced. While we were focused on our hunger, the riots elsewhere were about who Jesus was and what he did. Our faith was under attack, and there were deep divisions across the empire. The most divisive idea of all was promoted by Arius of Alexandria. He maintained that Jesus was not God. This made no sense. If Jesus was not God, why did it matter if he died? There would be no salvation and no resurrection. So in 325 AD, I was glad to go to Nicaea when Constantine called over 300 bishops together to settle this question once and for all. The council only lasted a month, but debate seemed to drag on forever. Was Jesus God, as he claimed to be, or was he simply like God? I was not a theologian, although I appreciate that the creed that came out of the council had served the church for centuries. I was a practical man with practical concerns, the needs of my people. But as Arius droned on, and no one said anything at all, I became more and more impatient. The truth was clear, and the needs were great. Finally, I just got up and slapped him. Everyone was stunned, but I like to think I got the conversation going. Damascus later wrote that I was prompted by my saintly vigor. But really, I was just mad. I spent 10 years in jail for the truth that Jesus is God. And I wasn't going to listen to Arius deny it. They locked me up, of course, but the council was short, and when it was over, they let me go home. The rumors are that Jesus or Mary or the angels visited me in my cell, and that other bishops dreamed about it. Even that Constantine dreamed about it. They would have to dream about it because I never said it happened. I never denied it either. Let us just say it was a nice jail as jails go, and I really enjoyed the visitors. Becoming a legend. I died 19 years after Nicaea on December 6th in 340 AD. They were peaceful and prosperous years, and I had the good sense to enjoy them. The church in Myra flourished, and so did its people. When you have more weddings than funerals, that is a good thing. Stephen had died in the persecution, but I baptized his grandchildren. Good kids, all of them. Those bags of gold paid off richly. Mine was a legacy of grace. So many good and gracious people came before me and surrounded me. Toward the end, I would sit in the sunshine down by the dock, telling stories to the kids, slipping them a piece of candy or fruit. It was nice to be older and wiser. It's even better to be gracious and kind. I never envied the death of the martyrs and wasn't afraid at the end. After all, I had slapped a heretic in front of an emperor. And I wasn't going to jail after all. Heaven welcomed me, and I was at peace. Or so I thought. Unfortunately, your reputation doesn't die when you do, and mine took on a life of its own. I blame it on the sailors. I know they respected me. All my life I had listened to them, prayed for them, even loaned them money. Apparently they talked about me a lot. And I'm not saying they were always sober. You would think I could be everywhere if you believe half of what they say about me. Turning up in storms, giving directions, calming the sea, raising the dead. But men who had asked me for help when I was alive continued to ask after I was dead, and they dreamed about me quite a bit. They even named churches after me in the ports and along the rivers everywhere. Hundreds of them. By the time I had been dead 1,000 years, there were over 1,500 monuments to me in Europe alone. The Norsemen were especially fond of me, for some reason. It might have been all the stories about me saving ships and sailors, but I think they really liked the idea of slapping people you do not agree with. They talked about me everywhere they went. And they went a lot of places. By the time the Norsemen got me back to Lapland, I was an Arctic shaman who entered through the chimney hole in the tents and rode magic reindeer through the sky. They named a cathedral for me in Greenland, the first one in the Western Hemisphere. But they also came down through Russia by way of the Dnieper River. The Russians turned out to be some of my biggest fans. The Greeks, too. The Eastern Orthodox generally take the stories about me very seriously. Outliving the myth. The Norsemen turned me into a wonder worker, repeating stories about my praying for sailors at sea and turning sausages into schoolboys. Clearly, they thought more of me than I did. But when they stole my bones, something happened for which I am grateful, even though it took hundreds of years. When they moved my bones to Italy, my reputation moved west. As the Crusaders shipped in and out of Bari on their way to and from the Holy Lands, they heard about me and carried my story home. They were more interested in my care for kids and widows, however, and in Europe I became known as a gift giver. This was a turn to my liking. I'm not saying that amazing things didn't happen when I prayed. I'm saying I did not do them. That is why we pray in the first place, for God's help. He is worthy of all our praise. I am worthy of none of it. But to be remembered as a generous man who tried to help people who were weak or just very young, that felt more comfortable. Giving gifts is natural and right. It is to reflect the character of God himself, however imperfectly we do it. You see, when I helped Stephen with a dowry for his daughters, I finally got over myself. It is not that I was a proud person, although in some ways we all are. It was just that I turned outward, toward others, and it felt so wonderful I wanted to do it again and again. And it is a nice way to be remembered. So my reputation spread across Europe, nurtured by the miracle plays. By the Middle Ages, I was Père Noël in France, riding a donkey and carrying a basket of toys and treats. In northern Germany, I was Weihnachtsmann, the Christmas tree man, trudging through the snow with a tree over my shoulder. I do not even mind Father Christmas in England, though he is more likely to bring rich food than presents. I lived through more than one famine, so I believe hearty food and stout ale should be welcome on a winter night. Throw another log on the fire and relax. It is all grace in the end. Anyway, the customs of gift-giving spread, and I get at least some of the credit. Aquinas said my habit of giving gifts in secret was important, and Dante said my care of Stephen's daughters was a model of giving. I have thanked them both. Soon schoolmasters made December 6th a holiday, which may explain why kids like me so much. Nuns left nuts and fruit on the doorsteps of the poor on St. Nicholas Eve. Kids started leaving their shoes out to be filled with treats. I was said to come through the window, which I assure you is more comfortable than a chimney. It was all great fun. And then I was almost completely forgotten, at least in the West. It wouldn't have bothered me, of course. These things are in God's hands. But the reformers put me on their naughty list. All over Europe, They were overturning statues and icons. Some really nice windows that told the story of my life were smashed. And feast days were banned, not just mine. Saints were never to be worshipped, I know, but it was a little disconcerting. Across Europe, I disappeared from the church, a sad thing by my reckoning, and I reappeared in the home of common folks who found my memory comforting and told my story to their children as embellished and as fantastical as it had become. And that was pretty much the way it was when the Puritans set off for America. Fortunately, the Dutch settled Manhattan. New Amsterdam it was then. Within 2 generations, it was New York, and the Puritans were running things. Most of the Dutch were Puritans anyway. But at least some of them remembered what it was like to wake up on the 6th of December with a shoe full of candy by the window. You will pardon me for taking the time to include here a line or two from the law that governed New York at the time, but it's part of my story. On St. Nicholas Eve, various persons have been standing on the dam and other places in the town with candy, eatables, and other merchandise, so that the magistrates, to prevent all such disorders and superstitions, have ordered, regulated, and opined that on St. Nicholas Eve, no persons, whoever they may be, are to be allowed within this town with any candy, eatables, and other merchandise. Now, a Roman soldier broke my nose, and my church suffered under Diocletian. It is no great loss to the people of God to go without candy. But it is no great gain either, or at least the Dutch didn't think so. Their Nicholas cookies survived, and so did I. This was to be my legacy, a kind old pastor remembered with cookies and stories, an example of charity and goodwill. If only my reputation had stood there. But instead, it was gotten hold of by the promoters and the merchandisers and the bankers and the storytellers and the sellers. This just about ruined me. Before long, I was a commercial icon, not a religious one. Do not get me wrong. I was a bit of a storyteller myself. I can spin a yarn. But as I said, it is time someone set the record straight, and that is all I am trying to do. Finding a perspective. I'm not exactly sure when I became Santa. Pintard and Irving had made me the stuff of bedtime dreams instead of daytime virtues. And there was more to come. There was Clement Moore and his poems for birthdays and special occasions. His Night Before Christmas was harmless enough as a family story. But once it was sent to a local newspaper in 1823, it has now been reprinted more than any other piece of writing in American history. If only Dante had been so blessed. Then Moore's poem prompted another family man, a cartoonist named Nast, to do some illustrations of me. It's Nast who moved me to the North Pole. At first it wasn't too bad. I looked something like a bishop at least. But by the end, I looked exactly like Moore had described me, with rosy cheeks and a stomach that shakes when I laugh like a bowl full of jelly. Let me be clear. I was never one of those bishops who made themselves fat while their people starved. I would rather give food away than eat it myself, and I often did. I know enough of poverty to take moderation seriously. Generosity is not the work of gluttons. I know that. And I know this too. Haddon Sundblom's paintings of me for Coca-Cola in the 20th century only made it worse. I became the best-known Christian saint in the world, but not for reasons I cherish. Maybe I'm being too hard on Sundblom. There is a playfulness about his paintings I find appealing. It reminds me a little of my last days, down by the dock, joking with the deckhands and playing with the children. listening to the deep blue waters lap against the dock. Thank God for the innocence of children. It is the children themselves who have kept for me a somewhat gracious image of my true self. Yes, many of them are greedy. They have yet to understand grace. But many of them do understand me despite the antics of their parents. And they understand gifts, too, which we all receive without strings. That's what a gift is, and no kid ever thought of giving Santa more than a cookie. True generosity cannot be repaid, only received. This is a theological lesson that comes cloaked in mystery, as many do. Certainly I regret it when children go to sleep trying to figure out how reindeer fly and not contemplating the mystery of the nativity. But it's not their fault. I blame it on Montgomery Ward and its red-nosed Rudolph. I blame it on their parents, too, who moved my feast to Christmas morning. It's not clear when this happened, but it is clear why. It's a lazy connection between the follower and the one followed. And it's a lazy connection between the true gift and the ones you buy at the store. This has been going on a long time. What is a 4th century bishop to do in the face of human nature and self-interest? Tell my story, I suppose. Give glory to God as best I can. Even a child can grasp the basics. A long time ago, a pastor, not unlike their own, would visit the sick and take care of children who lost their parents. At that time, many people were hungry or sick. He used his own money to care for people in his church, and he even went to jail for doing the right thing. He liked to play and tell stories. He liked to pray and ask God for help, and God helped him. My uncle once said, "I see a new sun rising and manifesting in himself a gracious consolation for the afflicted." As I said in the beginning, I never saw myself as a new sun. But I would hope that even today I could reflect a greater light. At the very least, I hope to be remembered as one who gave thoughtful gifts and made meaningful sacrifices. None of it will be remembered exactly as it happened, of course, but all of it can be true.